We're going to be starting a brand new series for the month of July, and the series is on understanding civil cases and lawsuits, a very fascinating world for me, but I'm sure also for all of you who found yourselves in situations where you wanted to sue and couldn't, or you've seen people have things happen to them where you're like, just sue. Well, let's talk about how those circumstances can come about and what options are available. So in our first episode, we're going to cover understanding how a lawsuit in South Africa works. We'll be joined by Soretha Venter for that conversation, who is a senior attorney and director at the IIE Varsity College Law Clinic's Inland Region. Then our car feature, we're going to talk about scratches and dents, what they really cost. Thando Ngibe, senior manager at Budget Insurance, will join us for that conversation. So get in touch with us, 011 883 0702, SMS us 31702, tweet at Relebogile M at Radio 702 using the hashtag 702 afternoons and the WhatsApp line 072 702 1702.
702.
Series Edition.
Series Edition time. This is a brand new series for the month of July. We're going to be discussing understanding how a lawsuit works in our first episode on our series on understanding civil cases and lawsuits. Soretha Venter, who is a senior attorney and director of the IIE Varsity College Law Clinic's Inland Region, joins us for this conversation. But get your questions in early. The conversation will go quite quickly. 011 883 0702 and the WhatsApp line 072 702 1702. Soretha, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Relebogile. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, and you?
Sorry, I just stumbled over your name there. I thought I had a difficult name.
Listen, as long as we know we are being, we know exactly who we're talking to and everybody understands us, I'm pretty sure we will be fine. Let's kick off by, I'm going to start from a very different place than what I usually do in these types of conversations, which is to explain what it takes for a lawsuit to happen in South Africa. But because our biggest reference point I've discovered, if you're not in the legal fraternity, is what we see happening in the States, because lawsuits are a lot easier there. So can we start off with what is a civil difference between a civil case and a lawsuit, and then talk about the differences between the US and South Africa?
That is actually, I think one of the biggest challenges, or one of the big challenges that we have in practice, is people watch things like Suits and those movies and they see how it happens, and that's what the expectation that is created, right? So then they come to us here in practice, and when you explain how it actually happens, people are almost disappointed because they don't necessarily get their day in court tomorrow, but they might have to wait longer, or they don't get to directly speak up in court because their matter is not maybe that type of matter. So it's actually very important to clearly define what is a civil suit in terms of South African law.
Yes.
So the easy answer is basically it's pretty much anything that's not a criminal matter. In other words, if you're not prosecuted by state and you take a matter to court, that's most likely going to be a civil matter.
So just can I ask a question on that? Because you said anything that's not criminal, right? And the reason that I'm pausing to ask this specific question is, does that mean that there are, if there is a criminal matter, you can't sue for over and above the state taking up, the NPA taking up a criminal case against somebody?
Not in terms of criminal law. So, and this is, I think, what also confuses people a lot of times. Some crimes also have a civil application, if I can call it like that. So, for example, let's use fraud. You go to SAPS to go lay a complaint of fraud. The police investigate, they arrest someone, that person is prosecuted by the NPA, and that ultimately will result or can result in a sentence or a fine and a criminal record. But now you don't have your money back. So let's say R1 million was defrauded. You don't have your money back. How do you get that R1 million back? Because the civil justice system is not geared towards getting the money back. That's where civil law steps in. And you actually have remedies for fraud where you can claim your money back from the person who allegedly stole the money from you. And you don't necessarily have to wait for a criminal prosecution. You can proceed with civil, if you want to call it prosecution, and sue the person for your money back.
Did you mean that the criminal justice system is not geared to recoup money that people have lost, or did you mean the civil?
No, the criminal.
Okay, so the criminal, yes, because you said civil, yes. So,
my apologies.
Yes.
No, correct, yes.
Okay, so in the matters where there is a loss of sorts, right? Because this could also be emotional distress, which we will get to as to why those aspects are very different in South Africa. But the civil route, if there was a criminal case as well, would be the route for you to recoup whatever you've lost. And those
your
are
damages.
Yes, your damages. And those are different courts that could be happening parallel with the same evidence and same all of these things, except the difference is in the one court it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt, and it's the NPA versus the person, whereas in the other court it's you being the applicant and the other one is the respondent.
Yes, or the plaintiff and the defendant, yes.
Okay.
So depending on the process that is followed, ultimately what you're trying to achieve through the matter, and civil matters or civil procedure, our civil courts are built to give remedies and relief to individuals. Now, whether it's a person or a company or a government organization, it is built there. The purpose is to obtain some form of relief from the court, not to punish necessarily, not to, like in the instance of a criminal court. So that's why I say civil is actually a very broad scope.
I got you.
People actually probably get more in contact with civil matters than they do criminal. They just don't realize it.
So then here's a question. We know there are things like medical malpractice. I mean, many different companies advertise on the station. How different is a malpractice situation, or is that a category within civil?
That is a category. If you're claiming for damages based on medical malpractice, for example, that falls within the civil law. So that's what we categorize then. It falls under the bigger umbrella of civil litigation.
So then let's talk about small claims court. Can you then just define the difference between going to small claims court and a civil matter? Or maybe that's another category of a civil case.
Yes. 100% it is. This small claims court is built for smaller claims, so it follows the name. It is civil matters where you are claiming a form of damages or relief that the small claims court specifically deal with. It is normally for attorneys don't appear in the small claims court, and it is more for the public to be able to exercise their own rights. For example, the maximum claim that you can claim in the small claims court is a 20,000 Rand claim, and it's limited in what relief it can give. So that is still under the civil umbrella.
I got you. And of course, those courts just make it easy for a person to not have to hire a lawyer or something when it's like, my friend took my 12,000 Rand wig and she won't bring it back. So we quickly go there. Okay.
Exactly. And it's to promote access to justice, because for a smaller claim, it does not really make sense to appoint an attorney necessarily. You might not get attorneys who want to work for such a small amount. It does not add up. The expenses and the amount of investment that you have to put into it just maybe does not add up. So it is a public-friendly court. The processes are public-friendly. You don't need an attorney to go and represent yourself there.
So I'm going to speak from my perspective with this question, being a upper middle class South African who would say, if somebody is not paying me my 50,000 Rand, right, and I can't go to small claims court because the amount is too big, but 50,000 Rand is actually too small for civil, not because the amount does not qualify, but because the effort for 50,000 might seem futile. Can you chat to us about, when you usually advise clients or what you have seen before in terms of amounts that are 20,000 and above? Because I almost feel like there is a gap where it's like there's no point, you have to just cut your losses.
Yeah. So there are alternatives to litigation. Our courts or the legal practice is kind of developing towards alternative dispute resolution. And I'm always in favor of alternative dispute resolution. So that is an alternative means of resolving a dispute. Ultimately, any litigation is a dispute. And some of them may well be able to be resolved through either negotiation or mediation or arbitration instead of approaching a court. People are quite quick to go see an attorney for relief, but they don't necessarily try first to make contact with the opposing party to see if they can't negotiate and discuss the matter and resolve it in that way. So the legal system is slowly but surely starting to go towards alternative dispute resolution, where certain rules have been put in place where we have to consider as attorneys mediation, for example, before we proceed with any matter, no matter the monetary value. And if you don't want to proceed with mediation, you have to give reasons for it. So alternative dispute resolution, I strongly believe, is an alternative. Approaching a community leader, approaching if it's within a specific community or within a specific culture, there are a lot of heads of the communities who actually assist to resolve these types of disputes.
So are you saying that if a person has some situation which is above 20,000 Rand, before they even go the route of contacting a lawyer, which already becomes a hard cost unless, you have an uncle who's willing to say, don't bother, or whatever the case may be, you can approach somebody to try and speak to assist in mediating. Now, I want to get to the crux of maybe what I can see is possibly a massive challenge in a country like ours, which is that if you are a David and you're surrounded by Goliaths, right? And you now send this email that says, guys, can we meet to discuss? And they just, they just ghost you. How would a mediation even become an option to you? Because I've been in situations where people just ghost you, and then the only time they respond is via a lawyer's letter that says, if you don't respond within, 21 days, then I am going to take you to court. And then they will sometimes call your bluff, which, leaves many people in those situations where it's like, all right, if we're doing this, you better be prepared for a roller coaster of years and bills.
Yeah. That is, unfortunately, I think that is a problem in a lot of jurisdictions, not only ours. But what I do know that I have experienced myself in practice is the David and Goliath situation it is big, it is a problem. But we have a lot of forums that you can actually approach for free that can assist. You don't have to necessarily approach a court. And that's, again, where ADR steps in. So, yes, you say, I want to negotiate and mediate, but Goliath says no. There are, depending on the type of matter, depending on the sector that you're in, there is most likely an ombudsman or a forum that you can approach who can actually assist and request, who can demand mediation. Now I'm talking about the Consumer Protection Tribunal,
yes,
the National Credit Regulator, the CSOS. There are so many forums that actually, if you just go do a little bit of research before you start to litigate, a lot of the time we move away from litigation into those forums because they are faster, cheaper. The client might not necessarily have the time or the finances to fund a big litigation procedure. And those forums do actually assist in those circumstances. So the problem is that clients don't always know this. Attorneys sometimes don't even know what are the forums out there because there are so many.
Yes. And that's why many of these bodies encourage people to only use companies for services that are with them, because then there's some jurisdiction over them as opposed to some random. I mean, we have a consumer rights feature. We deal with these issues all the time where ombudsmen, be it for rental agents and vehicles, and the list goes on. Okay, so in terms of the circumstances that would arise for a person that you would then say, I think let us consider sending a letter to begin the process for a lawsuit, even though the hope, as you've already shared, is ideally you want a company or whoever it is that's being written to respond within X amount of days, wanting to talk as opposed to going the route. But under what circumstances, and maybe we can start off by defining what damages are. We know the monetary ones are very obvious. So there is a direct loss with some kind of paper that says X amount, right? But there are other damages that exist, like emotional distress and those kinds of things. Can you chat to us about the damages and how South African courts treat them? Let's say emotional distress, and not necessarily things like loss of income or I can no longer have access to X, Y, and Z. The one that's difficult to quantify, which is the emotional distress and all of those other things.
Yes. So in South Africa, we do have different types of damages, like you've correctly or rightfully pointed out. And depending on the type of matter, you may or may not be able to claim the different types of damages. So the two damages that you need to differentiate between is patrimonial damages and non-patrimonial damages. In short, your patrimonial damages are things like your medical costs, loss of income, costs of repairs, future loss of income. That is something that you can quantify, that you can put into monetary terms. But then you get non-patrimonial damages, okay? That is pain and suffering, something that you can't necessarily put a price tag on. Your pain and suffering, disfigurement, loss of amenities of life, injury to personality, for example. Those are the difficult
like
ones.
Reputational damage and things like that.
Reputational,
Yes.
for defamation or something like that, okay? So those are the things where if I say, how much is it going to cost to fix your reputation? You can't really put a price tag on it. And that is sometimes the difficult ones to quantify. Now, again, depending on the type of matter, depending on what type of relief you're looking for, it depends on your amounts depend. So, for example, the RAF, where you claim for the medical costs of a surgery that you sustained or you had to go through because you were in a motor vehicle accident, there you get a bill from the hospital, you can claim that. But now you might be traumatized from it. So that goes towards pain and suffering or loss of amenities of life. How do you quantify that? So the RAF actually has a table that they kind of have developed over the years, for example, that will say that this is how much we'll pay for this is how much we can, because they've experienced over the years the type of claims. If you suffer pain, if you've got a claim for pain and suffering against someone, you're going to have to go and quantify that claim and put an amount on it.
And that's difficult because, like you say, and let's use a specific example. Let's say somebody calls in on the radio station live, they lie to my producer, and then they start spewing hateful things about me, let's say, hypothetically. And then I'm not at work for 3 weeks. I felt bullied, blah, 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 blah. And now, how do we quantify? So an example of quantifying could be, well, each day that I'm here, I'm usually paid X amount. Or is the quantifying that I have to say, I went to see my psychiatrist, I went to see my blah, 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 this is how much it costs? Because to me, it almost sounds like the emotional distress still would require some kind of a receipt, as opposed to me saying, I think that distress was R1 million worth of distress and pain and suffering.
Yes. So normally there we would rely on experts to do an assessment, and you get for example, psychologists who specialize in it, in the quantification of non-patrimonial damages. You get actuaries and accountants and people like that who specialize in those type of quantifications. So that would probably, if a client came to me for that type of claim, that's where I would start, is how do we quantify? Who can we appoint? Who can we get? Because that's expert level of appointed. There are no fixed formulas, unfortunately. There's no formula for us to follow. So it's a case-by-case situation, and certain factors, depending again on the case, on the damages, on the what's happened, it will have to be taken on a case-by-case basis. And for that, you are going to need experts who specialize in these types of matters.
I've got you there. What I'm going to do, because I see messages coming in that won't give us enough time to actually go to them, that we can pick up next week. But what would you like to close off with on this conversation around understanding how lawsuits work in South Africa?
I think the most important thing is for people to educate them on their rights before engaging in lawsuits or before engaging an attorney or legal representative. It's so important for you to own your matter and to own your right. And you can only do that if you have educated yourself on South African specific rights. AI is a great tool to use. However, it's not always South Africa specified. So educate yourself. And then go seek legal assistance while knowing the attorney is there to help you, but it's also, at the end of the day, it's your responsibility.
I've got you completely, Soretha. Thank you so much for chatting to us on 702 Afternoons. We will have an episode 2 and continue on this section of understanding how a lawsuit works in South Africa. And I'm sure many of you have still quite a few questions. We will touch on the processes and how to begin. And maybe we'll open up the lines as well to all of you to sort of do an on-air asking, hey, is this worth even trying to claim something?
Spend your afternoon
with Relebogile Mabotja
on 702.
Let's walk the talk.